What's up, everyone? Culture Dog Sam Hatch back with another video. We're still knee deep in the mire that is the 80s mania, the top 10 lists that just keep on coming. And don't worry, we're getting to sci-fi and horror. I know I'm such a tease. I'm like, yeah, just dangling that little sci-fi and horror carrot on a stick. But I know once I show them, you guys are never going to watch any of these other videos. So I'm going to show you every last possible genre I can conjure. And then a lot of people have been bringing up cool ideas too to do things that are just like, and I think I'll probably save that for the series too, which is not just like lists of films or TV shows in general, but just like moments or scenes or things like that. So I think instead of just going on a full gluttonous and diet of nothing but 80s for 5 months straight, I'll save those for like an 80s revenge video. And like I said, I've got 11 through 20 on a lot of these lists too, so I'll also save that for the future and mix it up. And I got the Laserdisc ones coming too, so I've got a Laserdisc mega list of 80s stuff, and that's going to be really fun, a top 50 list of 80s Laserdisc. So keep tuned, and yeah, you'll have solved that Rubik's Cube by the time we get to that point. But yeah, so we're going now. Last video we did kids movies. This time we're doing teen movies. So the same rules apply. They could either be films aimed at teens or films in which teens are the main character in the film and the subject matter thereof. Number 10 is Red Dawn. Red Dawn I did not see theatrically. I caught it on cable for the first time, and it's still a bit of a weird film for me. One, it's got that whole fantasy. I mean, like I mentioned before in a previous video, that we were all kind of living under a pall of nuclear fear at the time. And one thing that really wasn't contemplated a lot was an invasion fear. It's funny, like invasion was just like never a reality in the United States, like and never something you thought about. So this film was cool because it would have been pretty easy just to do a nuclear terror film or A Day After or something like that. But this one's like, well, wait, hold up. Like, what if we were actually invaded? And nobody had really thought about that or talked about that possibility. And then you're like, what if it's viewed from the lens of a bunch of high schoolers? And that makes it pretty interesting. So you've got this scenario where the beloved free country that you're living in is suddenly infiltrated. Then your town square is now something out of a documentary film, something you saw about like World War II, or somewhere where you'll be shot and gunned down if you're trying to go out to the corner store or go see a movie or something like that. So it really hit home seeing it through the lens of these kids, young consumers and people just energetic and excited about living, and everything that they yearn for is destroyed and just turning into survivalists. And real fascinating seeing how that affects them as characters. And where the film, I guess, drops the ball on that, some of it's a little too nebulous. There's a lot of information that's delivered in abstract ways, and it's hard to get a real feel for what's going on behind the scenes in this new reality. So that's it. I guess if I had a complaint, it was that the new reality is so interesting, but so ill-explained. And there's some things you're like, well, why can they go there? Because didn't they establish there that you'll actually get murdered if you go there? And like, why are they here? And like, yeah, so there's a lot of questions in the air, but it really ultimately doesn't matter because as silly as it all kind of seems from the future looking back, when Red Dawn came out, it was like, something that we all tapped into as kids. This like, what would I do if my country was invaded and I had to, and some people actually have to experience that. So I have the privilege of being able to sit back and think about it in a bit of nostalgia from the 80s. So yeah, I sound like a dick now. Number 10, Red Dawn. Number 9, The Last Starfighter. Yes, video gaming, again, being a huge part of the 80s. The zeitgeist, it didn't take long for video games to infiltrate cinema in the early 80s. And a lot of my favorite movies, thinking back then, all had scenes either at arcades or involving video gaming. But yeah, this film had a video gamer at the heart of it, who isn't as concerned with school and everything and socializing as he should be. He's still not a total outcast. And I like, too, that this whole kind of concept of a younger guy hanging out at a trailer park and being friends more with the denizens there, even though they bother him to fix all their stuff all the time. But he's, kind of more in tune with the residents of this home than he is with his own peers. And there's this one arcade cabinet that he plays all the time and is trying to defeat the Codon Armada. And it became a bit of a trope after this film, and definitely paved the way for things like Ender's Game, which, though that book came out in maybe a year or two after this film, so I don't know how much influence there was. But what if the video game you were playing was really just like a training simulator or some sort of reaction skill test to see if you were prepared to really do battle in outer space? You mix Robert Preston in there, and it was a lot of fun. And some early CG work, courtesy of, I'm sure there was like a whole fleet of Cray supercomputers, chomping those bits down. And it's fun. It's got a Death Blossom in it. Who doesn't love a Death Blossom? It's just a lot of good times. And also getting into the whole kind of robot substitute surrogate situation too. And a lot of fun in Last Starfighter. Hunt down a Signature Collection Laserdisc if you can, or just get it on Blu-ray. But number 8 is License to Drive. Again, just driving. It's funny because now I keep reading all these pieces about how the newest generation of teenagers that aren't as concerned with getting their driver's license and going in. Still in the 80s, a carryover from previous decades. Obtaining your driver's license was a ticket to freedom, a ticket to girls, possibly a ticket to all sorts of adventures, and you needed that as quickly as possible. And this film was a lot of fun. It turns that into a fantastical adventure, and I love those kind of One Crazy Night type films. I love that story structure in which your life can do a 180 essentially over a short course of events, and it has the Coreys. It brought the Coreys to a whole other level. Corey Haim and Corey Feldman in the film, and there's the lure of this super amazing girl, and the one obstacle is a vehicle. And it does have one of my favorite lines, which I quote all the time, which is, "The Lord giveth and the DMV taketh away." As much as a pseudo teen sex romp, whatever, without much in the way of sex, it's just a dating film essentially, or the hope of going on a date film. It had a lot of interesting zazz and panache, and there's some interesting details in there that hooked me. So it stood above a lot of its peers in my estimation, or just the way it kind of connected with me. So while films like The Last American Virgin aren't on this list, License to Drive is on the list. So long live the Coreys. Rest in peace, Corey Haim. Number 7 is Adventures in Babysitting. And again, a film I poo-pooed on its release. I had the opportunity to go see it in cinemas. But funnily, my friend Karsten, his sister wanted to go see it. And we made fun of her so hard for wanting to go see it. Because she was like, "Well, you guys want to go?" And we're like, "Yeah, we want to go to the town that the movie theater's in. Because there's a killer comic shop named The Bookie that's there. And we want you to drop us off at the comic book shop so we can hang out there for 2 hours, flipping through back issue stacks. And then you can come back and pick us up after the film." Then I realized kind of how foolish I was after the fact when I saw it on cable for the first time. And it was one of those things where oh, I'm a dick. This movie's a lot of fun. And Elizabeth Shue is delightful. Again, One Crazy Night vibe going on in the film. And an out-of-control babysitting excursion leads to a total adventure in the heart of the city. It was just way better written and acted and just way more imaginative and fun than I gave it credit for, and it completely won me over. And it's got Thor in it. Go Thor. Nobody cared about Thor at the time. Well, Norwegians cared about Thor, but nobody else cared about Thor at the time. Number 6, War Games. I saw this multiple times theatrically. John Badham classic film. Again, that whole nature of nuclear holocaust lingering in the background of everybody's fears over throughout the 80s. So yeah, whenever you're thinking about pastel times and fun, just remember the nuclear terror that was omnipresent at the back in the day. And this film certainly tapped into that and mixed in the fun of video games and computing at the time too. So and hacking. The main character Matthew Broderick plays. Alex Sheedy's in the film. Dabney Coleman again. Gotta love Dabney Coleman. But Matthew Broderick being able to hack in and change grades in a computer system. That was just a mind blower at the time. Just the sheer concept of being able to do such a thing, and led a bunch of us to think, I think this is a path I should definitely follow. And then that whole biting off a little more than you can chew. It's a film that celebrates teenage recklessness and the ingenuity of it, but then how he has caused major problems with his innocence and now has to reap what he has sown and fix things as well. So it's great. It's got problem solving, it's got adventure, it's got a bit of road tripping. War games. It's too cool. And definitely ahead of its times in terms of a warning flag about mixing computing with defense and school records. War games. It's amazing. Number 5. Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I was too young to see this cinematically. In fact, my parents dropped me off to see The Dark Crystal for one of my many times seeing The Dark Crystal cinematically, while they went to go see Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And it was something I caught on cable much later, but definitely made its impact. And there's definitely some sexual things in the film where I was like, whoa, definitely some eye-openers in there. But a little uncomfortable to watch with your parents. I don't recommend that if you're young-ish. But so much of the mall culture in the film was a huge draw to me, and the music of the film. Though the music of the soundtrack album, not quite as good. It was a little short-sighted of the producers and the studio to go for this whole kind of like 70s yacht rock vibe, because that's what sells film album tie-ins like FM and stuff like that. So they just went totally with what they knew, when obviously the film should have had a lot hipper of a soundtrack. Luckily Oingo Boingo made the cut on the soundtrack album. But total snapshot of early 80s culture. And I love that it was essentially like an accurate telling of Cameron Crowe's experience. Too cool. Number 4, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I remember hearing a lot about this film, and I kind of, again, wrote it off, but it had coverage in Starlog magazine because it had a lot of science fiction elements of it in it, and obviously time travel at the core of it. But it was a film that languished on shelves for ages, so I was pretty much convinced that it was going to be a whiff, because I'd read about it like at least a year prior to its release, and then I was like, realized the reality of the fact is this film's probably a stinker. Everyone realized it was a stinker, and they held it for release, and it's just going to be this dumb teen comedy and won't have anything going for it. And then I rented it or saw it on cable, and it was proven completely wrong. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is amazing, and it's a fun romp through time in the effort to save this high school graduating spoken thesis that these two characters have to do, or else they're going to split up and their band is going to be split up. So it's great. It's got these two lovable airheads at the center of the film, played by Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves, and the great George Carlin is their mentor and guide through time, Rufus. And I love how playful and inventive the script is, and the whole concept of that. You can reap the benefits of time travel immediately if you intend to, in the future, go back and do the thing that you want to do. So if right now I want a cheese sandwich, I could go, man, remember in the future at some point to go back in time and put a cheese sandwich on this table or underneath the speaker a minute before I do this video, and then I could now reach down and pull out a cheeseburger. And then the onus is of course on me to actually remember and go back on time. again, with slacker characters, that's pretty fun because then you realize that's a good motivator. It's a good way to make them actually do things. And I love how much of that is at the heart of the film, even if it's unspoken. There's a whole big like class presentation in an auditorium where you realize they've actually exploited that, but it's not really shown or spoken in any way, shape, or form. But so freaking inventive. And I love the look of it. There's a lot of cheesy late '80s hair rock going on the soundtrack. Yeah, it's awesome. The sequel's awesome, and I'm hoping to see the third film at some point in the future. I know they're making it, so yes, I can't wait for Bill and Ted Face the Music. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Get the Shout Factory. I got the Steel book, but there's a two-pack where you can get both films together. But I bought the Steel books individually, which was a little bit more expensive, but totally worth it because they're gorgeous. Number 3, again, missed it theatrically, but I didn't poo-poo it. I thought this film was going to be cool from the start, and it was. And I saw it, and it was amazing. And you all know it's amazing because it's still famous and popular to this day. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Yeah. John Hughes killing it. It's a very Chicago-esque tale. But yeah, also an interesting film. There were a lot of films in the 80s about these super white kids of privilege. Ferris Bueller definitely living a life I didn't live. Living in a house I didn't live in. Likewise, a lot of John Hughes' characters, 16 Candles, etc. So there was a lot of that, I wish I could be this guy, in the draw of the film, etc. So even though my life wasn't represented, it was still, I want to be this kid with this cool synthesizer in his room and 6 Sputnik albums and the ability to do all these cool things with technology and just to charm everybody. So while you can, but that's the fun of the story, is that's actually built into the core of it, in that his sister Jeannie thinks he's a total douche. And that you can watch the film from Jeannie's perspective, or you can watch the film from Ferris's peers' perspective, or any combination of characters. And the fact that he's got a friend named Cameron who has a car that he manipulates, and I definitely identify with that. I may have been a car manipulator in the past. You're too young to know better, and you kind of work these situations and you spin them so that it seems like it's like a bit of Inception. It seems like it's that other person's idea, or or it's the group's idea, but when it's really just like you want to go do something and you have to make it happen, but you don't have the car. So that is amazing. Just that dynamic was worked into the script so smartly. Mia Sara, I mentioned before that some people have maybe said that I had a thing for her back in the day, which I will neither confirm nor deny. But yeah, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's too cool. It's the best. And again, if you view it now as a film that is celebrating a guy that's not a great character, that's already in the film itself proper. Like, you don't even have to, it's not even like a Die Hard thing where like you can watch John McClane as the villain. There is a character in the film that actually thinks this guy is a villain. Multiple characters, because you got Rooney in there as well too, so you can watch it from his perspective. Yeah, it's awesome. It's so just rich and dynamic and fun, and the soundtrack is amazing. I was just listening to the English Special Beat Service album, which has a tune that is the instrumental version is great in there, and of course Oh Yeah by Yellow on there, and I mentioned 6 Sputnik before, but yeah, so many great songs. Awesome soundtrack, awesome film. Number 2, this one people are gonna be mad it's not number 1, but Back to the Future. And again, it's also a science fiction film, but it is a film about a teenager, Marty McFly. I don't have to tell you much about the film, but it also involves time travel, which I love. Time travel films, I'm a sucker for them, and I'm a sucker for them when they do things differently or imaginatively, because time travel as we know it doesn't exist, so why kind of explore it in the same way all the time over and over again cinematically? But yeah, Back to the Future was fun, and it does deal with the grandfather paradox rather head on, and the whole don't mess with the past or you'll erase the future. But just the idea of this kid from the 80s romping around in 50s culture. 50s and 60s culture was big in the 80s. I remember, there were just as many kids listening to Pink Floyd, maybe not 50s music, but definitely kids listening to, as many listening to Pink Floyd as they were listening to Metallica at the time. But 50s culture was still something Sha Na Na was kind of a big thing as a kid in the late 70s, maybe early 80s. So there was like a bit of a carryover. I know the 50s was more of a nostalgia decade for the 70s, but there was still some of that in the 80s. So there was that that draw of going back to a simpler quote unquote time and experiencing it from the perspective of a modern hip kid. And then there's just the whole concept from Starlog magazine dropped of all these interesting timeline possibilities and the possibility of there being two Marty McFlys because of the structure of the film and how time travel works. And so there's plenty of stuff to kind of chew on outside the context of the film itself. So yeah, enjoy all these extracurricular kind of thought problems and thought puzzles. And yeah, Huey Lewis in the News. Who doesn't love Huey Lewis in the News? So yeah, save the clock tower. Save Ferris and save the clock tower. Back to the Future, number 2. Number 1, this film is, it's on the cusp of being a teen. It's like a young adult film. So this is making a little bit of a transition. And I'm not cheating because Cameron Crowe was involved, but he wasn't the director of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. But he was the director of Say Anything. So as a lot of the films, and it's really fun kind of watching this because it spans a decade from which I was a young kid at the start of it and I was a young adult at the end of it. So Say Anything was this encapsulation of everything young adult about my life at the very tail end of the 80s. And Lloyd Dobler, played by John Cusack, was, again, I could have tons of John Cusack movies on these lists, like Better Off Dead, etc., and One Crazy Summer, Anything Savage, Steve Holland. He's the man. But Say Anything was this crystallization of everything that was going on at the time and this exploring at the cusp of the 80s and how it was veering into the 90s. And Diane Court was amazing. Ione Skye was everybody's dream girl at the time, including Ad Rock, apparently. And John Mahoney was amazing as her dad, and digging into all these kind of rich thematic elements about what it is like to be a young adult and rejecting the values of your parents. And there's so much going on in the film, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but just know that it's number 1. Again, eminently quotable. Stuff from The Gas and Sip is amazing. But yeah, John Cusack was at his most John Cusack in this film, and it's the coolest. He became an icon and kind of like a role model for tons of us. And I have probably said, you must chill about 1 million times. I have hidden your Firebird keys. You must chill. Eric Stoltz also showing up in the cast. Lily Taylor is amazing with her custom songs about her ex-boyfriend, Joe, who she's obsessed with. Again, it delivered a vision of my near future. Like, I didn't even realize like what was in store for me as a young adult until this movie kind of slapped me in the face with it. And yeah, so it kind of molded me as well as represented me. And Say Anything, it's a clarion call for every kid that wants to hook up with the valedictorian and like hold a boombox aloft and play Peter Gabriel's In Your Eyes. And yeah, again, Peter Gabriel's In Your Eyes, the soundtrack, I didn't even get into that, from the Replacements and Depeche Mode. And oh my God, Nancy Wilson's got some killer stuff on there, obviously, being tied to Cameron Crowe. And yeah, you should get it. You get a copy of the soundtrack. Skankin' to the Beat by Fishbone, Living Color. I think there was like a live version of Cult of Personality. Joe Satriani's One Big Rush. Dude, so good. Anyways, number 1, Say Anything. Teen movies.